Now, I know, Rouhani doesn't sound like Ahmadinejad. But when it comes to Iran's nuclear weapons program, the only difference between them is this. Ahmadinejad was a wolf in wolf's clothing. Rouhani is a wolf in sheep's clothing.
Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is in the United States. On Monday, he met with President Obama in Washington. On Tuesday, he addressed the United Nations General Assembly, and here is what he said.
Rouhani was also Iran's chief nuclear negotiator between 2003 and 2005. He masterminded the strategy which enabled Iran to advance its nuclear weapons program behind a smokescreen of diplomatic engagement and very soothing rhetoric.
His speech there followed speeches by President Obama and President Hassan Rouhani of Iran. I met with him today, and we talked about his visit to the United States and the other speeches at the United Nations.
So here we are on Wednesday afternoon.
It's good to see you again, Charlie.
Thank you. Good to see you. I look forward to this.
So do I.
You clearly have come here with something to say in New York, at the UN, and in this conversation. So the President spoke of Iran, the President of the United States spoke, and the Prime Minister of Israel has spoken. Where are we at the end of the week in understanding this negotiation with Iran and what the implications are for Israel?
First of all, I'd say the implications for the world, because if Iran's pursuit of nuclear weapons succeed, then the danger is not merely to my own country, but the danger is to the United States. Look, Iran has been expanding an enormous amount of effort, money, pain, sustaining pain, to get nuclear weapons. They're developing ICBMs, intercontinental ballistic missiles, not for us, but for you, to reach the American mainland. You can only arm these with a nuclear payload, not TNT. They're developing these underground bunkers, secret bunkers, not to produce civilian energy, but to produce uranium, enriched uranium, for bombs. They have a heavy water reactor to pursue a plutonium path, not for civilian use, but for bombs. So Iran has been going this whole route, sustaining enormous sanctions that are taking a bite of the Iranian economy to get a bomb. They're pretty close.
How close?
Well, they're close to the point where they want to be in a situation where they have enough enriched uranium at lower levels, but to be able to punch through and enrich it very rapidly within a matter of weeks to get high enriched uranium that can be used for a bomb. Doesn't mean they'll do it.
They're close to that point.
They're getting closer. They haven't crossed the red line I put at the UN. They didn't go for high enrichment. Instead, they built a lot of piles of low enriched uranium, but then added centrifuges, including very advanced centrifuges that can get them from low enrichment to weapons grade high enrichment like that. That's where they are. Problem is that we have been working together, the United States, Israel, and many other countries, have put place very forceful sanctions that tell them if you continue in this path, those sanctions will collapse your economy. And there's been a credible military option by the US, perhaps by Israel, that says to them, even if the sanctions don't work, there'll be ways to take out your program. The combination of strong military sanctions and a credible military threat has produced...
Economic sanctions and a credible military threat.
Correct. This has produced a big debate in Iran, inside Iran's hierarchy. Remember, Iran is governed not by Ahmadinejad or Rouhani, the presidents who came before them, but the person they call, aptly by the way in this case, the supreme leader. That's Ayatollah Khamenei. And the debate is this. Ahmadinejad said, do hard things with hard words. And he got the program to where it is, but he also got the sanctions. Rouhani says, do hard things with soft words. That way we can get over the line without, or very close to it, without incurring the sanctions. So that's why he got elected, because people wanted, within this limited slate of candidates, they eliminated 99% of the candidates, the regime, and left 1%, 7 out of 700. And he was elected in order to relieve the sanctions. He came here to relieve the sanctions.
Maybe he was elected because the Iranian people wanted change.
Sure, they want change. Are you kidding? If they were given an open slate of candidates, they'd toss these people out in a second. All of this regime. Who wants to live in a medieval theocracy? That's the last thing they want. Iran has the majority of Iranians. I mean, I say they're the two most pro-American and Western-oriented populations in the Middle East are Israel and Iran. Give them blue jeans, Beverly Hills, you know, the works.
The internet.
Everything. But they don't. I mean, Rouhani twits here he uses the Twitter here in New York, but he doesn't let the population there in Iran tweet. They don't use Facebook. I mean, so they're putting on a nice show here.
Okay, but under no circumstances will the Prime Minister of Israel believe that the Iranian regime can change and can say, whatever we were trying to do, we're prepared to change, because the sanctions were helped.
Right. Well, the first thing is understand what is going on in Iran, and I'm not guessing. This is not a guesstimate. This is very solid information.
You have sources?
Yeah, a few. There is a very clear distinction between Rouhani and Ahmadinejad. Rouhani says we can get to nuclear weapons with a smile. Ahmadinejad said we can get to nuclear weapons with a frown. Because the sanctions are about to take a devastating blow on the Iranian economy that has already been badly hit, Khamenei has given Rouhani a chance. Go ahead, try to get me a lifting of the sanctions without giving up the essentials of the
But you come in town and
so I said just to complete, I can't give up this line. I worked so hard to get it.
Yes.
So Rouhani is a wolf. I said that Ahmadinejad was a wolf in wolf's clothing, and Rouhani is a wolf in sheep's clothing. But we cannot let him pull the wool over our eyes. So the answer to your question is, can there be a real change? Maybe yes, maybe not. But the only way we can find out is to insist on an agreement that truly dismantles Iran's nuclear program.
And the Prime Minister of Israel is worried that the President of the United States will not insist on as tougher demands as the Prime Minister would like to see. And he worries that Israel will be left alone.
Well, first of all, I can tell you that everyone shares the worry. I had 3 hours of conversation yesterday with President Obama. This is on a day when the U.S. goes into shutdown. So you can think that he's had other things on his plate. And I appreciated the fact that he gave this the time, and it tells you that we share a common concern: how to stop Iran from developing nuclear weapons.
And are you on the same page?
Well, it was an open conversation between open-minded people. I don't think that this is yet crystallized, and that's why I appreciate the opportunity we had. If we work together, I think we can get to a common policy. The policy should be not to let Iran, it's in no one's interest, not ours and not the U.S., not to let Iran wiggle away with a partial deal in which they make cosmetic concessions. You lift the sanctions, or part of them. Once you do that, the sanction regime can collapse.
This is an important point. I mean, where is it that the United States and Israel differ on having negotiations with Iran? The President has said clearly, we have to see deeds, not rhetoric.
Absolutely right.
So you've been there with the President for 3 hours and had a frank, where are you different?
I didn't say frank, I said an open and good exchange.
What's the difference?
Oh, that's diplomatic doublespeak for saying you had a confrontation. We didn't have a confrontation. We had a real exchange of minds of two leaders who were concerned with achieving a common goal.
And so what do you differ on?
We don't know that we differ on anything. We don't object to testing the diplomatic route. If there's any country on earth that is threatened with annihilation from Iran's nuclear weapons, it's us. So if we can resolve this diplomatically, bravo. But the question is, what is a deal that does it? John Kerry said, Secretary Kerry said, a bad deal is worse than no deal. And I guess my point is that a partial deal is a bad deal. Because when you lift the sanctions for some minor stuff that they do, or a partial thing that they do, it takes years to put the sanctions in place. I've been involved with this. Years. But when you remove them for concessions that the Iranians could reverse within weeks, you may not be able to put them back in place. There are a lot of countries, I'm not going to name them, I'm the foreign minister, so I'll be diplomatic, I'm also a
I know
foreigner.
that. I know that.
So there are a lot of countries who are just waiting to lift the sanctions, and it could very well collapse, the sanctions regime.
Okay.
And then Iran gets off the ropes and gets to break out capability,
But I hear,
and we lost.
I hear you saying
That's not in our interest or in the
you
American
had a full
interest.
conversation with the President of the United States, and you pretty much agree on everything, and that you have full confidence that the President of the United States understands Israel's fear and reservation, and clearly has your confidence that he'll do the right thing.
I think we're both now in a real exchange trying to work this out, because I think from an American point of view, not only an Israeli point of view, and from, Arab point of view, significant European countries' point of view, the last thing we want is to let Iran wiggle away with a smile campaign, to have us, be very happy to do a North Korea again.
Yeah.
In North Korea, everybody celebrated the great deal. It was widely celebrated, as people would do. You want to see this thing work out.
And you said,
and then a year later, after this celebrated deal, North Korea explodes its first nuclear device. But you see, Iran is a lot worse than North Korea.
well, you said it's 40 North Koreas.
50.
50.
50 North Koreas, because Iran seeks our destruction, because Iran sends terrorism to, just in the last 3 years, to 25 countries, 25 cities across the globe, because Iran is participating in the mass murder in Syria, because Iran is trying to undermine all these regimes. This is a very dangerous regime. You don't want this regime armed with nuclear weapons.
Okay, but you're not answering this question. Are the demands that you would make on the Iranians to prove that they're real and credible the same demands that the President will push forward in the negotiations with the Iranian foreign minister?
We have to see.
You ought to know that.
We have to see what. No, well,
We know what your demands are. You laid out what the four are.
But the United States is formulating its demands. The reason I put forward what I did was that Iran has no natural right to enrich uranium. If it wants civilian nuclear energy, it can have it without enriching uranium. They shouldn't have the enrichment of uranium, given the nature of the regime, given the fact that they've deceived the international community.
But you don't have
twice.
any doubt that they deserve the right to have peaceful nuclear energy.
Well, so does Canada, and so does Mexico, and so do 17 other countries, 15 other countries, 17 altogether, that have civilian nuclear energy without enriching uranium. You know why?
Why?
I'll tell you why. Because Rouhani said this. He said, a country that can enrich uranium to about, this is a quote, to about 3.5% will also have the capability to enrich it to about 90%. That's weapons grade. Having fuel cycle capability, this enrichment, virtually means that a country that possesses this capability is able to produce, so he says, nuclear weapons. So if you want civilian nuclear energy, you don't need to enrich. The only reason you need to enrich uranium is not to have civilian nuclear energy. It's to enable you to build nuclear bombs. That's why Canada and Mexico don't need enrichment. That's why Sweden and Switzerland don't need nuclear
And do you
weapons.
think you can prove this to the Iranians?
Don't need
that
enrichment.
do you think you can prove that to the Iranians, and they may be prepared to make a deal that is
Prove
not
it?
necessary?
No, you don't prove it. I mean, these people are very cynical. I mean, look at what Rouhani was saying in the U.S. We're for democracy. The tragedy in Syria, we're against terrorism. Come on. This isn't serious. So it's not a question of proving to them. It's a question of lining up
So, but if
the
you're saying
right
that, if you're saying that
position.
people are not serious, you seem at the same time to be saying we should go forward with the negotiations and see if we can find a better route than having them try to have a nuclear weapon, have the ability and be close to the ability within weeks, so that you believe Israel or the United States will have to strike.
Well, there are two issues there. The first is, can you negotiate with somebody who's not trustworthy? The answer is, of course you can. I mean, that goes on all the time.
Sure.
But,
But
Reagan's...
in fact, Rabin said that's what you have to do. You negotiate with your enemies.
Yeah, but you negotiate in a clever way. You're not blinded by them. It's, you remember Reagan said trust and verify?
Yes.
I said distrust, dismantle, and verify. So, yeah, you can do that, but then you've got to put the right pieces in place and not allow them to fool you.
So tell me what you...
And the second point is, yes, you should keep a credible military option all the time, because ultimately that is what got the sanctions to work.
And there is nothing in your DNA that would allow you to be Prime Minister of Israel when Iran has the capacity to make a nuclear bomb. Nothing. Under no circumstances
That's right.
would you allow that to happen.
That's correct.
Does Israel today have the capability to stop it? Because some people say, yes, the United States does, but no, Israel does not. All Israel can do is delay.
Well, you know something? I'll give you a state secret here on the Charlie Rose Show. The U.S. has a stronger military than Israel.
We all know that.
But don't shortchange Israel either. Don't shortchange. But I wouldn't go beyond that. I never do.
Do you think
I'm
you
just
can
about the only Israeli who never talks about our military capability, you know. But I think that it's very important to make sure
Tell me how you
that
feel.
a regime, I represent a people that has lived for almost 4,000 years. We've had our great periods and we've had our awful periods. And we went right into the abyss of destruction when the nations of the world did not believe a radical dictatorship that spoke about our annihilation. We've learned not to dismiss that. When people say they're out to kill you, take them seriously. But above all, prevent them from getting the weapons to kill you, the weapons of mass death. I think that what we've also discovered is that when these radical regimes start with the Jews, it never ends with the Jews. It didn't happen before, and it won't happen now. There's a cult that controls Iran. Yes, it sends diplomats. They've got, some of them wear ties, not all of them. Most of them don't. But they come in very reasonable. They sound reasonable. And they are reasonable up to the point when they'll get the weapon. I always give the example of somebody who's totally unreasonable with a wild ideology, but until they get to the point where they can actually use that power, they appear very sensible. That's a suicide bomber. We've had a lot of them. The suicide bomber, as he's driving on the way to board the bus, he obeys the traffic laws. He says the right things. Once he gets on the bus, bam. I think we've learned that radical regimes that are intent on global domination and with wild ideology, messianic, apocalyptic ideologies, once they get to the point where they have awesome power, all bets are off. We cannot be in that position. Therefore, I say, what, not negotiate? Yeah, negotiate. But be very tough. Don't do partial deals that allow them to get the weapons of mass.
Do you worry that you're being, at this moment, while negotiations are underway, too strident in your language?
No.
Okay. Secondly,
No.
if
Being very truthful.
If negotiations are underway, you can't launch an attack against Iran.
There you go again. You want to talk about that.
Yeah.
I just formulated the principle. You know what the principle is?
Well, no, what's wrong with what I just said? You cannot attack during the time that they're negotiating. Can you?
You know, I never talk about that, but I did and do say what has been said time and time again, including by President Obama. Israel is threatened with annihilation by Iran. And Israel has the right, I would say the duty, to defend itself by itself against any threat. And I hope that this proposition doesn't have to be tested, Charlie. The way that it wouldn't be tested is to get a successful dismantling, a complete dismantling of Iran's nuclear weapons program peacefully. I have a stake in that.
Could they ever convince you they had done that? That's the question.
They don't have to convince me. We know. It's not a question of convincing. We have, it's not what they say. It's what they do. It's not their words, which are
Do you think
a double talk.
Do you assume you know more because of your own intelligence sources about the Iranian state of mind than the President Obama and his intelligence sources and other nations and their intelligence sources? You, because of what you think misreading Iran would mean, believe your sources of information about them and their intent are better than anybody else's.
Well, we have superb intelligence, but here's the thing that I would comment on. It's not their state of mind, although we know about that a great deal. It's the state of their capabilities. And the biggest mistakes that countries have made, I think in ancient times and modern times, is not to focus on their adversaries' capabilities. We want to make sure they don't have the capability. Whether or not they have the state of mind is a different question. But if they don't have the weapons to carry out their ambitions, it's less important.
Now, I've had one Secretary of Defense after another say they have not yet made a decision to build a nuclear weapon.
there are two aspects to it. One is they're creating, the biggest thing, the most difficult thing in getting a nuclear weapon is to get
level of enriched uranium.
Exactly. Get the enriched, the fissile material.
Right.
Okay? That's the stuff you put
Right.
in the bomb. You're 90% of the way there when you got it. The last 10% is coating that ball of fissile material with an explosive device. That's not very hard to do.
No,
So when they say they haven't yet made a weapon, I'm not sure
decision,
about that.
they said. They have not
but,
yet made a
But
decision.
what they mean to say is they haven't taken the ball, wrapped it around a detonator, and connected
Or
the
they
two.
don't have the capacity yet to do it. So once you have the capacity, you can make decisions.
We have to make sure they don't have the capacity to make that ball.
So the red line
and
view
those
is the
balls.
capacity.
By the way, Iran, Charlie, would not be interested in having one bomb or two bombs. They're gearing up with their infrastructure for 200 bombs. And they're not developing those ICBMs for us. They can reach us with what they have. It's for you. It's for you.
Well, you clearly told the president that, didn't you?
I don't have to tell them that
Okay.
because the American intelligence knows as well as we do that Iran is developing ICBMs not to reach Israel.
I want to ask
reach
you
well
one
beyond.
more time. Is there any space between you and the American president? Because much has been written and said about differences between the prime minister and the president. Are you saying after this 3-hour conversation, we're on the same page, there's no difference, we have the same go-ahead momentum?
I think that at this stage, what I can say is we have a common goal. We've had it for many years.
Well, yeah, that's always been true.
But we also, I think
That's
the president...
nothing new about having
I think
a
the
common
president
goal.
something very important. Said something very important publicly, and he repeated it privately. You said, what we have to see are steps, actions, not words.
Okay.
Actions that are transparent,
And that's good
verifiable,
enough for you.
and meaningful.
And that's good enough for you.
And I think what we're talking about right now is, I think, what are meaningful actions that will do
And do
the
you
job?
agree on that?
Well, we're talking about that right now.
Okay. Let me turn to Syria. Again, through the Russians, conversations with the Syrians. They'll give up chemical weapons, and the United States will not launch an airstrike. What's your assessment of that arrangement?
I hope it works. I mean, it'll be very good if that happens.
Do you trust the Syrians to do that?
No, I trust, I told you, distrust, dismantle, and verify. That's
And do you believe they will dismantle?
Netanyahu's three principles.
Yeah. And do you believe they will dismantle?
I think they might try to cheat, but if we have very good intelligence, as we do, and the U.S. does, and others, and we share it, then we don't let them get away with it.
What do you think of the role of the Russians?
So far, I think it's been good. Let's see if it continues. It'll be better for everyone. You know what Syria shows you? It shows you that a regime, a radical regime, an irresponsible rogue regime, if it has weapons of mass destruction, they end up using it. That's what people fail to believe or understand. You know, you see this gun in the first act, it goes off in the third act. That's why these regimes should not be allowed to have these weapons. But chemical weapons kill people in the thousands. Nuclear weapons kill people in the millions. And rogue regimes should not be allowed to have weapons of mass destruction. If it can be achieved in Syria through the threat of military force, and then an effective dismantling, a full dismantling. You don't say to Syria, oh, well, take off a few of your weapons and we release the sanctions. You say a full dismantling. That's it. That's a good model for Iran.
And so do you believe that Assad can somehow find a way to stay in power if he dismantles the chemical weapons?
Yes, no, I don't think that's connected. I think his power is based on gunning down opponents with machine guns, attack helicopters, artillery into neighborhoods. Unfortunately, he's doing an awful job there, and this is a great tragedy. By the way, I mean, look, we have our interests, and I take care of Israel's security interests very carefully. But there's a humanitarian crisis in Syria that is reaching monumental proportions.
Let me tell you, there's
millions displaced,
yeah.
Probably 110, 120,000 killed already. A lot of women,
tragedy.
children. This is beginning to mount as a huge tragedy. And I think we have to think about what it is we do about this. I spoke about this with the president yesterday.
And what was the conversation?
Well, he agrees with that. How to do it, that I think is important, that we keep off the Charlie Rose show, even the Charlie Rose show for now.
How to do it.
Yeah.
Well, most people always believed that there'd be some cooperation between the United States, Israel, Jordan, and others in the region.
I think there's a common concern in the region.
Yeah.
There's a real question of, you know, there are two bookends to this problem. The first is you don't want Iran, Hezbollah, and Assad winning because that's a terrible thing. I mean, that's the Iranian axis goes.
Yes, but
that's the first thing. And the second thing is you don't want Al-Qaeda and Al-Nusra winning. I happen to think that there might be a third way, but again,
what's the third way?
that's the next interview, Charlie.
Oh, no, come on.
Oh,
This
come
is
on.
serious.
Well, you know, you have
This
to
is
invite me
serious.
again.
No,
It is
serious.
You're right. It
You
is
know,
serious.
and I mean, this is the point of this, is sort of some understanding of how you find an appropriate avenue to avoid war and the tragedy of more than 100,000 people dead and more than 2 million refugees.
Well, I think
What's
that,
the way that you think might work?
I have some ideas.
Well, just give me one.
Not yet.
Really?
Not yet, no. Because I think this is, because exactly as you say,
Oh.
it's more serious than it appears. And you know, in some matters of achieving a resolution of a conflict or achieving peace, I make an amendment to Woodrow Wilson. Sometimes it's open covenants secretly arrived at. This is one of those areas where you want to have a solution that the whole world can see, but you don't necessarily have to publicize it.
Is it on the table now?
Well, it's a preliminary thought that I have.
Moment of history. It is said that you were part of some negotiation with the Syrians trying to work out the Golan Heights in order to do damage to the Iranians and their avenue to Hezbollah.
Well,
So you were prepared to negotiate with the Syrians.
There were a lot of ideas that were being
What's
proposed.
been written about?
There were a lot of ideas that were being proposed by various parties, but you can never get the Syrians to truly accept the kind of arrangements that would mean that Israel would always be able to defend itself. They just weren't there.
Do you think the Soviets the Russians want to keep Assad in power, or do they care?
Well, I think what President Putin says is you don't want the al-Nusra and al-Qaeda crowd to win. It's true. But you don't want the Iran and Hezbollah and Assad to win either. So I guess so far the alternative has been additional bloodletting, endless bloodletting. And again, I think from a human point of view, just the tragic consequences of this, there is a point in which the human cost reaches such levels that we can't, in good conscience, allow this to repeat. There got to be, I don't know if there are other ways, but I think we have to look for other ways.
There's also on the table, and negotiations taking place now, again under the initiative of Secretary Kerry, between Israelis and Palestinians. He seems to believe that he has an operative idea and plan that can do something in the next 9 months.
I hope so.
Do you believe he has a credible plan that can deliver some kind of agreement between Israelis and Palestinians having to do with the incredibly complex issues? Having to do with the border, having to do with refugees, I mean, right to return, having to do with Jerusalem, having to do with a whole range of things that are at the core, you know.
Yeah, it's tough. There's no question. And 6 Israeli prime ministers, myself included, didn't succeed today.
Yeah. But do you believe there's something different about what John Kerry is trying to do that gives it a chance?
I think the test will be not in America's intentions, however well-meaning and they are, and sincere, and he's working very tirelessly. I think it's a question of whether we're going to get finally Palestinian leadership that will understand that in addition to Israeli concessions, they will have to make concessions, like preparing their people for accepting the Jewish state. The way I gave this speech at Bar Ilan University. It's a religious university, and I said, we're going to have 2 states for 2 peoples. A demilitarized Palestinian state that recognizes the Jewish state. I chose my words very carefully. Demilitarized Palestinian state that recognizes
the Jewish
state, because it's about the Jewish state.
Are you the only person in the Likud party who believes in a 2-state solution?
There are a lot of questions across the Israeli political spectrum because people saw that we gave up territory. In the case of Gaza, we did land for peace. We gave up Gaza. We tore up the settlements that were there, displaced 10,000 people, ruined their lives. And we said, okay, so if we get peace, that's fine. But we got, Charlie, we got 10,000 rockets. We got Iran to take over Gaza with its proxies, Hamas and Islamic Jihad, and they fire rockets into Israel. So obviously people said, we don't want a replication of that. Show me the Palestinian leadership that recognizes the Jewish state, that enables the kind of security arrangements on the ground that Israel will have, that Israel will defend itself by itself, and coincidentally also defend the Palestinian Authority and keep the stability of Jordan in place. If we have that, then I think we have the makings of a deal. I don't think it's wise in this case. Again, I'm a Wilsonian, amended. Open covenants, secretly arrived at. Yeah, we should try.
Okay, but
the jury is out. I don't know.
Everybody is speculating about what the Kerry Initiative is. I mean, is it different so that it might be a secret covenant that could produce real results, openly arrived?
It'll be an open covenant.
Yeah, open covenant, secretly arrived. No, openly covenant, secretly arrived. Well, I mean, is it different? That's what I'm trying to ask.
Is it different? I don't know. We'll see. Yeah. I mean, we're talking...
Because everything else failed, as you know.
It failed, but the reason it failed is for the same reason for the last, why is this conflict here since the 1920s? Before there were territories, before there were settlements, before there was a single Israeli soldier. Why? Why was this opposition? I mean, they were offered, the Palestinians were offered a Palestinian state in 1948. They opposed it because they didn't want a Jewish state. Why did they fight the Jewish population in the 1920s and the 1930s? Because they opposed a Jewish state and any boundary. Why did they continue to fire at us from Gaza after we left every square inch? Because they're opposed to a Jewish state. So Mr. Abbas, I'm not saying he's equivalent to Gaza, he's not.
Settlements in which you have continued in your government, are essential for the security of the Jewish state. They may very well, the argument is made, do damage to the security of the Jewish state because they stand in the way of some very successful agreement and two-state solution that is in the interest of the security of the Jewish state.
I think the settlements are going to be an issue in the negotiations.
They are.
But they're not the cause.
Most people want to ask, I mean, why is it necessary?
Well, let me tell you.
Because it's not done.
Let me tell you. That's the first thing. You asked me, and this is issue. Settlements. Everybody's...
Well, I know you took a chance at the beginning of the Obama administration.
I did something else. I launched these negotiations. The reason these negotiations were launched because I was willing to do something that no leader was willing to do. I released terrorist killers.
Right. You said that was a very hard thing for you.
It's for me very difficult, personally. I fought terrorists. My brother died in the battle against terrorism. I myself was wounded releasing Israeli hostages from a hijacked Sabina airplane. I nearly died there. Yeah, it's very hard to release terrorist prisoners. And by the way, 95% of the Jewish public in Israel still thinks this was a mistake. So I made some contribution to launching these talks because I want a solution. But I want a real solution. It's like Iran. I don't want a partial.
But I still don't understand why you don't understand why you think building settlements in East Jerusalem is necessary.
Now let me tell you something.
First of all, find a solution.
Let me tell you something.
When the world believes it stands in the way of a solution.
The world believes a lot of things, but the world doesn't get it. And here's what they don't
I think the American president believes that.
Well, let me tell you what I think is the issue, and then you can judge whether you agree with me or not. And the same thing I say to everyone in the world. The settlements and the territories are not the cause of the conflict.
Nobody says that, but they stand in the way of a solution.
But here's the way they get a solution. They don't stand in the way either. 90% of the Jewish population is clustered in Judea, Samaria, and the West Bank is clustered in a tiny fraction of that land. It's not an issue. It's a bogus issue. It's about as big an issue as people said, the whole conflict in the Middle East is centered on the Palestinian
But here's the question.
That one died. That sacred cow has been slain.
Here's the question.
I'm telling you that we can walk away. Suppose we just walk away from every settlement. We dismantle everything. We walk away the way we did in Gaza. We walked away. And what happened?
But that was not you.
And what happened?
Was a different prime minister who had the courage to walk away. Well, it turned out that it didn't work out. They came in and Hamas continued.
So how do we know that it doesn't happen again? In other words,
the lesson...
Charlie, you're not going to escape this.
No,
This is,
the lesson,
I got you. Hold on.
No, you don't have me. The lesson of
I got
Gaza is that you can never do what?
The lesson of Gaza is that the settlements, we tore up the settlements, we
Right.
removed, we disinterred people from their graves. We gave the whole territory lock, stock, and barrel to the Palestinians, to Abbas. It was taken away from him in 2 seconds by Hamas and Iran, and they continue to fire 10,000 rockets at us.
And you think that's...
So the settlements, obviously, their presence or lack of presence there wasn't the cause of the conflict. This conflict is not about that. It's also about
What
that.
is this conflict about?
The Jewish state, period, in any border, in any territory.
But there are
in
many
anybody.
people who will say that if you're not prepared to give up the West Bank, you are giving up some real possibilities about the Jewish state, because you will create a state, that cannot sustain itself as a democracy. This is not a new argument for you, but this is an argument that has resonance among many people in Israel, including some former prime ministers.
Well, first of all, it resonates with me too. I don't want a binational state.
Exactly.
And that's why I think we have to work out a deal. But I also don't want...
Work out a deal under the Kerry initiative kind of thing.
Yeah, well, actually, under negotiations with Abbas.
Right.
And we welcome American help, and I've been talking to John Kerry, not a lot, every 2 days or so.
Yes,
sometimes 3 times a day.
Yes, I know.
We talk, we try to reach
But
them.
that's good.
But it is, actually.
Really good.
It is. But here's the thing. I think that there are 2 poles to this. One, you don't want a binational state. That's for sure. The second is you don't want an Iranian state in the territory, any territory that you vacate. That's what happened in Gaza. We got out of Gaza, Iran walked in. Previously, we got out of Lebanon, Iran walked in, once with Hezbollah and the other time with Hamas. We can't afford to have that happen a 3rd time in Judea, Samaria, and the West Bank, because that's the end of Israel. We can't have another 100,000 rockets, short-range rockets, on the airport in which you land and on every city.
The occupation is because there's a great fear that what happened in Gaza would happen in the West Bank or in Golan. Yes? That's what you're saying.
That is
That's
across the board
point.
in Israel. But I'll tell you something else. You say, what are we doing there? What do you mean, what am I doing there? We've been there for 4,000 years. Well, not quite. Abraham came 3,700 years ago.
As you know, you were not there pre-1967.
No, I'll tell you where we were. Well, we were in some of the areas. We were kicked out by the Jordanian assault. In Gush Etzion, we were massacred in Hebron after thousands of years. We were there for 2,000 years before the Arab conquest. Now, I have a deep attachment to these places. They're in the Bible. I've walked there with my feet. It burns my soul. I mean, it's etched in my heart and in the heart of any Jew who knows his history. But I also recognize that there, in this land, there is another people. So we have to get some arrangement. It's true that we preceded them by thousands of years, but it's true also that they're here. So we have to somehow, I would say, adjust or make amends for the fact that we have a deep attachment to our historic homeland, and that parts of it will have to make an arrangement in order not to have a binational state. How do you do that? So you don't create, you don't get the worst of both worlds. You leave land that is strategically vital for you, that is the historical cradle of our national existence, and you get Iran. You don't want that. So I'm trying to work out a deal.
But that doesn't have to be the alternative, and you know that.
Well,
somehow you get Iran if you withdraw from the West Bank and make an agreement with the
Palestinians. Sorry, that's what I got twice. I got it in Lebanon, we left, and we got Iran.
You got Iran because of Hamas? You're considering Hamas being Iran?
Well, no, it's only supported by Iran, and then they've got something to out Hamas called Islamic Jihad that's supported by Iran.
But they're Palestinians.
Yeah, but they're, Charlie, without Iran, they have nothing. Their weapons come from Iran, their money comes from Iran, their training comes from Iran, often their directives come from Iran. Without Iran, you take away the scaffolding of Iran, Hezbollah collapses, and Hamas and Islamic Jihad collapse. Effectively, we've given up territory to Iran's proxies. We cannot have it happen a 3rd time in an area that is 20 times the size of Gaza, that girds our cities and the narrow waistline that is Israel. So we have to have a different arrangement. And that arrangement will mean that Israel will have to have a long-term military presence along the Jordan River to prevent this area, this Palestinian state, from being perforated by Iranian agents from Jordan or from elsewhere. That is what we have to do. And that will protect us. Paradoxically, it will protect the Palestinian Authority. It will protect Jordan. We cannot say, oh, well, what happened in Gaza didn't happen.
An international force won't do it for you, will it?
An international force?
Yes.
You mean?
Along the Jordanian
Like,
River.
are you serious?
No, I'm just asking.
I mean, look, we have this little battle in Syria, okay? Yeah. So there's a force there called UNDOF. UNDOF, countries are leaving UNDOF. They haven't been fired at. We've got an international force called UNIFIL.
All right.
We went out of Lebanon, and it was promised that UNIFIL will monitor any rearming of Hezbollah. Hezbollah has since added 60,000 rockets and missiles. You know how many reports UNIFIL has filed? Not one. Zero. Okay? Right. We had a European international force on the border of Gaza and the Sinai when we left Gaza. That evaporated in 7 hours.
All right, I'm going to ask...
Hamas came in.
Okay.
No, we're not going to... And Charlie, for all the good press in the world, I will not compromise on Israel's security.
No one doubts that.
No
one doubts that you would compromise on... No one doubts that you would compromise on Israeli security. They might quarrel with your definition of Israeli security.
Well, who's going to define Israeli security? The people who are not going to suffer the consequences of bad steps?
No, people within the state of Israel can have different views, you know.
Sure, but they, to be honest, right now, if you ask them, the overwhelming majority, I'm talking about huge majorities, and
have the same definition of Israeli security you do.
No, more tougher.
Okay,
maybe. But I'm pretty tough.
Okay, I want to. Those very nice young men that work with you, and I promised him I wouldn't go over. So, this last question.
Charlie, it's enough that I wanted not follow their instructions. Why are you following them?
Exactly.
They don't give us instructions. They work for me.
I know. And you convinced me today they don't even write your speeches. You write your speeches.
Oh, well, I've had the same speechwriter changing himself for the last 35 years.
This is a serious question.
They get unbelievable. They rejuvenate themselves every time. You know?
And then they get imported. Then they get appointed ambassador to the United States.
And many other positions too.
It's interesting. We now have the Kerry Initiative on Israeli-Palestinian. We have the Iranian negotiation between John Kerry and the foreign minister of Iran. And now we have Syria with the Russians involved. Everything is in play in the Middle East.
Yeah.
That's opportunity.
Some of it is opportunity. I would say the greatest change that is happening is not fully observed. Because what you see is a change that I see in the Arab world, in many, many Arab countries, that because of the concern with Iran, the concern with Syria, they say, well, Israel is not our enemy. Israel is not the problem. Israel may be part of the solution. They want, in this terrific convulsion that is taking place, to make sure that the outcome doesn't threaten them, and some of the outcomes that would threaten them would threaten us. For them, it'll be a threat to the regimes. For us, it's a threat to the very existence of the state and the people. But it affords, perhaps, a historic opportunity to get Arab countries to join with Israel, and I would hope with others, to have the basis of a broader regional security that advances stability, and one would hope also peace. That is happening. It's not obvious, but to me it's obvious. It's not obvious publicly, but to me it's obvious that something big can happen here. We just have to make sure that in this state of flux, we do the right things and not the wrong things, because we could easily upset the apple cart in a way that we won't be able to put it back together again. We cannot do that. We have to be very responsible. Buck the trends. Don't go by fashion. If you govern by fashion, and you govern by the kind of editorials you're going to get, you'll get good editorials, which will be, and then you'll get wonderful eulogies. I'd rather have bad press and no eulogies. Better bad press than a good eulogy. My responsibility is to ensure the survival, security, longevity of the one and only Jewish state. I will do that pursuing peace. I will make, and I'm prepared to make, historic compromises. I will never compromise on Israel's security. Never.
Mr. Prime Minister, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Charlie.